Let me give you an interesting stat. Last year, there were more billionaires and millionaires created through inheritance than through entrepreneurship. The bank, right, that I'm at the moment, right, Bank AlJazira, it's a 50-year-old institution, but it's planning on being around for the next 500. So that gives you an idea of the mindset shift that is happening in Saudi Arabia. I think when they hear about Saudi Arabia, they think about, traditional, insular. I think those days are long gone. Long gone. I think what you're seeing is a young, dynamic population led by probably the most visionary leader I've seen in the world at this moment in time. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nahim Bassa, and I'm the group head of strategy and transformation at Bank AlJazira, a leading Shariah-compliant bank in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's my pleasure to be here today to talk to Areeb on all the things that are changing in the kingdom, that are changing in financial services, and more importantly, about financial inclusion, financial accessibility, and how you too can contribute to building a better planet.
That's the way it's done. I think we'll keep that intro. I'm Areeb Siddiqui, and welcome to Muslim Money Talk. Assalamu alaikum. Nahim, thank you so much for joining us. It's kind of a full circle moment because I don't know if you remember, but the first time we met was on a podcast, virtually, Fintech Insider, but now here we are in person in London. So welcome.
Amazing to be here. Assalamu alaikum to all your listeners. Eid Mubarak to them and to you and your family as well.
At the time of filming, it's just gone Eid.
Right. Yeah. So hopefully everybody's had a blessed break with their loved ones. And excited to be here in London, right? It's been a few years. Definitely, I think I was here pre-COVID, so lots of things have changed, right?
Absolutely.
We were fortunate enough to catch up in Riyadh recently, right? And you know the rate of transformation there. So thrilled to be here today. Thank you.
So you've seen the change in Saudi over the last few years. How does London compare? Better or worse?
Wow, interesting, right? When you work in different markets, right, you always have these different perspectives that come into it, right?
Yes.
About the rates of change, what's published in the media, what's your own lived experience.
Yeah.
I think London, the crown has slightly slipped, as I would say. At one time, I know it's a fintech podcast, right? But I think if I look at it, was probably the leading center for fintech a couple of years ago.
For sure.
Now you're seeing probably a lot of the Dubai's, definitely Riyadh, right? I mean, I cannot tell you the growth rates. It's incredible. But also the emerging markets, right? Indonesia, Malaysia, right? Where you guys are at, right?
Yeah.
Incredible growth rates. I mean, I think about the rates of transformation in those countries, the amount of infrastructure being embedded into those nations. And it's just remarkable. I always tell everybody, right? If you get a chance, try to go work there, try to go visit there, right?
Yeah.
It'll blow your mind, right? And it's not one thing being better than the other, right? But it's just our perceptions of how fast this world is changing is so dynamic.
It's an unprecedented time within these geographies. And the beautiful thing about it is that a lot of them are Muslim majority countries where this is all coming from. So it's almost like the first time and things that people couldn't have predicted 4, 5, 6 years ago, So just getting into it, we already have a little bit, but when people think of Saudi Arabia here in the West, what do you think is the biggest misconception?
Wow, I think I'll give you my lived experience because I think those are always the most interesting stories, right?
Yes.
What I seen 4 years ago since I joined the bank, right, that I'm at the moment, right, Bank AlJazira, it's a 50-year-old institution, but it's planning on being around for the next 500. So that gives you an idea of the mindset shift that is happening in Saudi Arabia. I think a lot of people have heard something's happening there, things are moving. Is it another Dubai? It is far from that at all, right? I think the rates of transformation across economic, social, technological, right, innovation is just incredible, right? People here, I think when they hear about Saudi Arabia, they think about, traditional, insular. I think those days are long gone, long gone. I think what you're seeing is a young, dynamic population led by probably the most visionary leader I've seen in the world at this moment in time. Somebody who's reflective of the population, right? I think we've seen in other markets where you get slightly older gentlemen and you think, is this the best that is out there, right? When you want somebody reflective of being able to drive a new agenda, right? And to take a leadership role in the world. So I think when I look at Saudi Arabia, even 4 years ago, and the rate of transformation that has happened, right? I mean, now we talked about it a bit off camera, right?
Yeah.
About when I arrived here in London and going through immigration and customs, it felt very tired,
Yes.
right? If you go to one of the Middle Eastern countries, it is highly digitalized, facial scanner, biometric recognition, right? Boom, boom, you're in and out. Very slick, very well organized, very customer slash citizen slash resident slash tourist orientated. You can even get into Saudi Arabia now on visa, on arrival, right? Superb customer experience, right? And especially with some of the changes in the unopened areas in Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Al-Ula I always recommend to people. It is mentioned in the Quran, right? But it is a phenomenal place to visit, right? Historically, there's Hegra there, there's the Nabatean population, right? So if you're into history and these untouched places, right, that haven't even been open to locals, right? It's a view into a world that you would not have experienced before.
Wow.
Then you also look at the Red Sea projects, right? And what's happening there from a tourism perspective. But there's 18 giga projects, 36 mega projects. Those are big numbers, right? And a lot of people say, oh, but is this really going to happen? We've heard things about NEOM, is it not going to happen, etc. Let me be very clear. The Saudi 2030 vision, right, which is the brainchild of the Crown Prince, has ambitious targets. The nation is ambitious. But more importantly, right, if you set your target so high and you get to 80% of it, you've done a sterling job. You've done more than what most people have expected. And they always say, you know, that 80-20 rule, right? If you get 80% of the value unlocked, that'll be great. And I look at all the sports events that are also happening there, right? I mean, I think one of the local boxers from the UK is out there recently. AJ, right?
Anthony
Huge
Joshua.
following, right?
Yes.
Like a superstar there, right? I don't know why people resonate with him, right? But they really do, right? And they had the big boxing fight. I'm not a boxer. I don't look like a boxer.
But you were super into the fight at the time, I remember. There was Francis Ngannou, right?
Francis Ngannou, right? Because he's African, right?
Yeah.
And I'm South African, right? So I like to represent the brotherhood, right?
Yes.
I think it's always good to support, right? The continent you're from. So, and there's Formula One, obviously, right? Soccer, Ronaldo, right? Is always obviously there, and a lot of other footballers there. What is really interesting, right? Unlike other areas, you would say like, but is the infrastructure on football coming, right? Yes, you get these superstars. Yes. I can tell you, like my son, right? He's in one of the French football academies there, right? Okay. So there's a lot of grassroots infrastructure being put into place, right? This is not just a one-shot or one-trick pony. So I think that's what's really happening in the country at the moment.
And I think that's what really differentiates this Vision 2030 from, I think, anything we've seen around the world globally, because you've got so many shareholders involved, from regulators, the sheer amount of investments involved, all kinds of institutions, from banks, fintechs. If we're looking at the financial services objectives, and they have some, you mentioned huge growth targets. So let's look at some of them. So they want to get 520 fintechs by 2030, and there are about 120 at the moment. So a lot needs to happen there. 935 billion in banking assets, 70% increase in growth rate of digital payments. I think home ownership needs to get to like 65, 70%.
Yeah.
Is all of this noise, or is it a reality? What are you seeing on the ground?
I can tell you it is a reality.
Okay.
Right. Firstly, let's look at the Islamic financial services market. I think it's about 2.7 trillion, right?
Yes.
By 2030, it's going to be about 4.5 trillion, right? So what's that? 11, 12% CAGR rates, right?
Yeah.
Incredible numbers, right? This is globally, right? This is about 2 billion Muslims, right? Huge need for financial accessibility, financial education, right? And you know, there's also misconception in Saudi Arabia, right? Of Saudi Arabia, we talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's a rich country, everybody has money. That's not the case, right? I can be very clear. There's real bread and butter challenges, right? The government has done a great job of controlling inflation, right? A bit easier to do in that market than other markets, right? But what you also see is this transformation targets that they've put down, right? You mentioned it, right? Number one, increasing the savings rate in the country from 3 to 6%, doubling it, right? Well on the way, right? SAMA, which is the central bank of Saudi Arabia, has done some really innovative things. They've created the fintech sandbox, right, to allow these fintechs to come in. It's 525 fintechs, right? So I think they'll overshoot this automatically, right? Actually, 150 is the number from last year. I think we're sitting at 205, 210.
Wow.
Already, right? So I think you're going to see more and more, right? And what the encouragement is, local fintechs, foreign fintechs, right, bringing something new and dynamic into the market. Home ownership has been a huge success, right? There's something called the REFD program, which is the Real Estate Financial Development Program, which sits underneath the FSDP, right, Financial Services Development Program, which then falls, which is the Industry for Financial Services Program, which then fits into the Vision 2030. So Vision 2030, it's bottom up and top down, right? So there's clear metrics and clear targets and clear performance management. I mean, we both worked in corporates, right? We've seen, right? How often is this really done, right? Where you have this distillation, right, of the vision into hardcore numbers, tracking of these numbers, where we head, where we're being challenged, right? Home ownership has overshot its targets. They have to scale back the program now.
Already. That's crazy. And I think even the tourism numbers.
The tourism, they hit 100 million, right? The kingdom hit 100 million,
Wow.
right? Just on Saudi Airlines, right?
Wow.
So the plan is now, by 2030, I think it's 150 million visitors per year. Right?
Gosh.
And this is outside of the Hajj and Umrah,
The pilgrimage,
right? Which is a phenomenal logistical feat. I don't think any other country can actually do this, right? I mean, I'm proudly South African, but I don't think we'll be able to pull this off, right? I mean, the hospitality, the logistics, the ability to move people in and out safely, right? And to feed them and it's incredible, right? And to provide the security, because you're getting different people from around the world, right? I mean, Hajj now just completed 2 million people.
Yeah, from all over the place.
In incredible numbers. So I think it's real. I think it's tangible. I think the local population is also seeing the benefit of this. And this is key, right? It's not just foreign interests, or it's really female workforce participation has jumped up dramatically.
Yeah.
Unemployment has fallen, right? Low single digits, right? You see the share of females in the workforce, right? I mean, I can talk about our institution, right? We were in the low single digits, right? Now nearing the 20s.
So that's real. That's really
That's
being
real. And that's
enforced.
in 2-3 years. Right?
Because that's I think the biggest question people have for me when I say, I'm going to Riyadh and we're trying to set up stuff there and we're trying to do things. It's like, well, what's the attitude towards women, right? Because apparently there's no women anywhere. You can't see them anywhere. If anyone is going there for work purposes, they have to have an abaya in their bag or, a full face veil, full covering. But when I was there recently in January, February time, when we met, I think I saw women in every organization we went into in real front-facing roles, senior roles. But so that's real. That is happening.
100%. And I think when you land at the airport, right, you see it firsthand.
Yeah.
There's females at the counters, full abaya, full burqa, you see it all, right? You see the full spectrum, right? You go to the tourism desk, right? There's a female there. You go to the hotels, right? Females at the front desk, which never used to be there, right? And then that's just the service industry. Then you get into I would say the highest skills in industry, engineering, right? Financial services. I mean, one of the biggest banks in Saudi Arabia, right, is the HSB version called SAB. Saudi Al Awal Bank, right?
Yeah.
Chairman is female.
Really?
Yeah, right?
Gosh.
My team, 50% female.
What's the cultural attitude towards this? Because it's such a huge amount of change for a country that has been around for decades, and culturally there's been a lot of ties to a certain way of doing things. The people on the ground, how do they feel about all this change?
I can tell you very practically, the driving has improved, right? If you've been to Riyadh, right, it's an interesting experience, the driving. I think female drivers have definitely helped improve the situation.
I can imagine.
But closer to home, right, in the office, right, it's been a dramatic, I mean, you have countries like the US struggling with the glass ceiling, right?
Yes.
And here you've just broken and shattered it, right? Over the course of 2-3 years, right? So there's still a lot of adjustment that needs to be
for sure
to happen. But what you can see is that organizations are taking this very seriously, right? And I think that helps. When we talk about diversity, inclusion, right? This is what we're really talking about, right? Female empowerment, merit-based meritocracy, right? And phenomenal talent coming through, right? And what's interesting about the talent, right, is that a lot of the youngsters, right, and I say this, I keep on going, when you're younger, right, you're more globalized, right? A lot of the girls and guys, right, the gentlemen, gentlewomen, right, have been studying at some of the top universities in the world, right? The top ones in the States, Harvard, Yale, etc., right? London Business School, you name it, they've been there, right? So they bring a lot of that global mentality to a lot of the things that we are trying to achieve in the country, right, in line with Vision 2030. But I think importantly, right, keeping the local Saudi heritage, right?
Yes.
Because I think you can't lose out on that, right? I think the Ministry of Culture does a very good job of that. Every year there's a common theme. This year was 2 years ago. It was the year of calligraphy, Arabic calligraphy, which is phenomenal, right? Last year was the year of Saudi coffee, right? And I think that's if you're into coffee, come and experience it, right? It's a great. Many countries you go to, right? They'll always have some sort of tour, right? This is something to behold. And then this year was the year of the camel, right? Funny enough, camel milk, right? It seems to be the next avocado wave in the world.
The next superfood, yeah.
So these are the real practical changes that are happening, right? There'll obviously be challenges, right?
Yes.
I don't think you can just jump generations and not do it. But when you're forward orientated and you're looking towards building a new society, right? You create momentum. And when you have momentum, right, you'll have the bumps along the road, but those things are not roadblocks. They're the minor stuff, right? That you don't steamroll over through, right? But you've set a direction. We're going to climb Everest. We're going to get there.
How are you seeing this being implemented within your own organization? Bank AlJazira, 50-year-old bank, huge heritage in Saudi. You're the group head of strategy and transformation. Often that can be quite a difficult job in a big old legacy bank, navigating politics and bureaucracy to actually see change. Has Vision 2030 just helped, basically give you some ammunition to take to the boards, to take to the decision makers above you, to make real stuff happen?
So I think a couple of things have played into the favor of Bank AlJazira, right? And even including myself in my current role, right? People always ask, head of strategy, so do you just think the whole day, right? And like come up with crazy ideas? No. When you're in charge of like groups like strategy and transformation, what is strategy? What is transformation, right? Many people have this view that the capability-based view of the world or the market-based view of the world or the platform-based view of the world, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's much more emergent than that. We're in the era of emergent strategy, right? The way the old 5-10 year plans are done, right? You got to think about 18 to 36 month horizons. That's a lot of change to take into account. You've got 2030 vision, big drive, right, from the leadership, but those are translated into real hardcore metrics, right?
Sure.
From a regulatory perspective, you think about, I mentioned, you have this sandbox where you can experiment, but there's things like open banking, right, which helps you connect data and allows consumers to share their data for better financial services and accessibility and innovation, etc., right? But you're also seeing things around, okay, how do we standardize the licensing regime, right? How do we simplify it, right, while maintaining the robustness of the system, right? You're also getting the technological changes, right? I mean, the hype word right now is artificial intelligence, right? But I'm also in London because of the ESG agenda, right? Sustainability. Is it hype, right? Or is it real, right? How much? I think every country is struggling with this, right?
Yes.
Then you also have the agenda of inclusive growth for small, micro, medium-sized enterprises, which every country, right, knows this is the future, right? So how do you bring all these SMEs into the market, right? How do you give them not just an account, right, or just a loan, right, but how do you actually help them grow, right? What's the accounting system that they're using? But I would go even further. What's their supply chain management, inventory management, warehousing management, right? How can they grow their businesses? Because this is the service that they really require. Yeah. So, I mean, I just talked to a few of things, right? Then you also think about the cultural transformation, right? I talked about the societal transformation. What about the cultural transformation of the bank, right? How do you equip people to be resilient in a phase where things are changing every day? You got to think global, act local, right? So what's your values, right? How do you reward those values and behaviors, right? How do those tie into your strategic objectives in the market? In a market that is super hyper competitive.
Yeah.
There's 3 new digital banks, right? Big banks backed by big players, right? Coming to the market, each with their own value proposition.
I'm glad you mentioned that because, the main thing that we were hearing about in the UK, especially during COVID, was STC Pay, which I think was the first mainstream sort of e-wallet to launch in the country. And it looked like people were really taking to it. And it's almost like suddenly the idea of a digital bank came into people's minds in Saudi. Has that almost lit a fire under the traditional banks? And okay, we need to digitize, we need to innovate, we need to stay competitive. Would you say, or are they not taking it as
I would take a slightly different view, right?
Okay.
Number one, STCPA, great success story, right? The first unicorn, I think, out of Saudi
Yes.
Arabia, right? So I think that's good. They've also got a unicorn program now. So I think there's about 20 or 30 firms in that unicorn program, right? So you'll see, and you'll hear a lot about those that come out in the next couple of years, right? And we work with a few of them. One is Flowered, right? I'm just going to name check name check a few as I go along. But why I think this is important, right, is because when you set these ambitious goals, right, and you set these changes in the at play, you force things to change. You force people to start adapting, right, and living through these changes, right, and gaining the skills to adapt, to be resilient, right, and also to start thinking, okay, what is the commercial outcome out of this, right? When SDC came, right, it came just around COVID time, right, and I think we mustn't forget the negative effects of COVID, right? It's always nice. We'd like to think it's in the past, right? But psychologically, it was tough for a lot of people.
It was
right?
traumatic.
It was really traumatic. Kids especially, right? I've got 2 young kids. And I always think to them, I think they've missed that social interaction, those skills at that certain level. On the other side, it really promulgated this real rapid take-up of digital payments, right? Which then, for banks, it wasn't about, oh, they've done it, let's digitalize our paper, right? It was more like, wow, guys, this technological change is real. The country is hungry for it. Citizens are hungry for it. I mean, there's an app called Tawakkalna, right, which I love, absolutely love. There you have all your, I can see my kids' school grades if I want to, right? How they're doing, right? I won't disclose how how well or not well they are doing. But you got your driver's license, all digital. I got my Karma, which is my residency permit, right? My passport is there, right? So my biggest fear is like not having my power bank with me, right? It's all there, right? My travel records in and out, right? So it's easy. I love going to I was telling you earlier about, I love going to apply for a visa and they say, where have you traveled in the last 5 years? I'm like, if I show you my last 1 year, right, I can't even remember the amount of stamps, right? So it's really convenient from that perspective, right? Really convenient to check how many, I got a fine the other day for driving a bit too fast, right? Within 15 minutes, I got the fine, I had to pay it, etc., right? But no paper-based.
It was all seamless.
Right? All seamless. I could do it through my banking channel, or I could do it through via the app, right? And that's all payments in the background, right? If you really think about it. So I think they showed the art of what is possible. And then the banks didn't take a defensive view. I think the banks took okay, we are all going to go into it, right? And banks got good.
Yeah.
They got the firepower, right? So now it's not just about, I can have a slick app, right? It's really, what's the value proposition to it,
of
right?
course.
Can you maintain it, right? There are regulatory changes that you also need to be taking into account. I've always said to people, banks are trusted but maybe not loved, right? But that trust is super important. You want your money to be kept safe. I'm sure your audience, your listeners would tell you their friends who have got skimmed, who've got hacked, etc., right? So it's the onus is on the bank, right, to make sure that doesn't happen, to safeguard, right? Have that operational, what I call excellence, that resilience in the way they do things. Because as long as they keep your money safe, I think that there's still a role for the traditional banks to play, right? I also think that what you'll see is this hyper competition coming in, driving each other to greater heights, right? Buy now, pay later is a big success story, right? Globally, it's also taking off in the Middle East, right? Fractional ownership, right? Is coming. Invoice sharing schemes, right?
Yes.
Really, really big, right? Many others.
What are you most excited about? Because we talked about a lot of things, open banking, AI, but what most excites you about the changes coming?
I think the market is still growing, number one, right? So when I say the market is still growing, right? If I look at the compound annual growth rate, it's probably at 6-7%, right? Which is ridiculous, right? It's like China in its heydays, right? So there's a lot of room for you to play in, right? So you can come up with really new and creative products that are not there, that really drive this financial inclusion and financial wellness and holistic looking at the consumer, right? Yes, you can take open banking to open finance to the open economy, right? Where all your data is shared seamlessly. You can do things in real time. I'm not talking about real time payments. I'm talking about, okay, do we want to disrupt the credit card business by putting open banking, a buy now, pay later solution, integrating it, bam, you got a new value proposition.
True open finance, which we don't really have here in the UK.
No, nobody has.
No, I mean,
right?
we've been using open banking for years,
Yeah.
but I feel like it's kind of stalled here in the UK. But yes, all the banks have APIs you can connect it in, but it's not real time. The PISP is not perfect right now, the payment initiation to the actual movement of money. And still, it was meant to go beyond banking. It was meant to plug in your insurance providers, your investment providers, everything. And like that app that you described in Saudi, where you could see everything in one place, that's yet to happen. And I feel like there's this amazing opportunity in places like Saudi, where you have this influx of buy-in from all the relevant stakeholders and all the investors, that maybe those are the people who are going to crack it and come up with ideas like what you just talked about, disrupting credit cards or what have you.
And what I also like, you asked that question about why I'm so excited about it, why I'm so bullish on it.
Yeah.
Right? Because of a couple of things. Number one, if you want to start a business in Saudi, a lot of the red tape has been cut, right? Number two, the financial service industry, which has been notorious for like account opening, right? Getting the loan or giving this advisory slow, really like, right? Where the digital players, right? And the new banks are trying to do it, or existing players with their new value propositions, targeting youth, you see all this like niche segments coming out, right? Now, whether these are all profitable, right? And you can grow them into something, commercially sustainable, right? The question is out there. But if you don't, there's no risk, there's no reward without risk, right? So you have to, and that's the business of banks, right? Managing risk, managing stakeholders, managing the regulator. I'm also quite bullish on what I see as these ecosystem partners coming together. You got the regulator, right? Very forward-looking, right? They even got an innovation division underneath it, looking at CBDCs, right? How do they harmonize maybe Sharia legislation globally, right? Because, it differs, right?
It does. Right? On our app, we have 5 different Sharia standards for how you screen stocks or funds.
You talked about payments, right? And payments directive. So PSD3 is coming out, right? It's looking at trying to harmonize some of these things, right? So this is a great place to be, right? In terms of harmonizing regulations, so common standards. So you're a global citizen. You identify yourself as X, Y, and Z, right? But you're really a global citizen, right? I always tell people, we laugh, right? Everybody says, well, it says on your LinkedIn profile, you're SVP, Group Head of Strategy and Transformation, etc. I was like, yes, but I self-identify as a husband and a father of 2 kids, right? Because we all play different roles, right? And we all have different things that are happening in our lives. And I think when I look at Saudi, I think there's also now a premium residency program, right? Which helps people who want to come to this country, right? And stay there for a long time, maybe buy property, right? Which is unheard of, right?
So they're really trying to encourage more and more people to move
There's
in.
Ministry of Investments, right? Who will help set up your company. There's tax breaks as well, right? If you locate your headquarters there. So many things. I mean, we can talk for hours on this, right? Maybe you need to do one of these shows in Saudi, right?
I'd love to. I think we can go find a studio there, do that, and do a complete Saudi roadshow. That would be amazing. But just going back to your role at the bank, and you've mentioned that banks have the firepower to make these changes happen. Do you see the change all happening in-house, or are banks more open to collaborate with third parties, with fintechs to make that happen?
I think, initially banks were a bit lost, so they rushed out to just partner.
Yes.
Right? But the partnerships had varying degrees of success.
Okay.
Right? Successful to an extent that things got launched into market, right? But did they really get the commercial outcomes? Probably not so much, right? I think there's also the cultural dynamics, the ways of work, right? The mindsets, right? You've got a very legacy structured organization and a very nimble, agile organization. And then you've got the regulation in between, right? To maintain the stability of the system, right? So the question then became, okay, instead of just partnering for partnering's sake, right? Can we build some of these things in-house? Because software is now a core capability.
Okay.
Right? To any organization. I think gone are the days of the big vendors, right? Building your core banking system, owning your apps, owning the code, etc. I think you need to own the code, right? You need to take ownership of that. I think you need to take ownership of your own destiny, right? Because if you're using a common platform, everybody's doing the same thing. There's no differentiation.
Sure.
And this has been a bugbear of most consumers, right? Well, the banks are all the same, right? So I'll chop around to who gives me the cheapest rate. And I think then you're commoditizing your industry, right?
Yeah.
And then the question is like, what are you really doing in the industry? Are you really innovating, or are you just trying to be the lowest cost?
You're just trying to catch up.
Yeah, and you're always catching up to somebody, right?
Yeah.
You got to chart your own course, right? It's good to do peer reviews, good to see what else in the market, but own your tech stack, right? Number one, 100%. But then partner selectively with some really good ideas and partners. And I say partners, I'm talking about, it's not a transactional relationship. You got to be in it to win it, and you got to take the good with the bad.
Yes.
The failures that come along, learn from them, make it better, right? I think the world of we're also in the world of ecosystems, right? So you cannot do everything. At the end of the day, a bank has core businesses. Got a retail business, got a corporate institutional banking group, and treasury. Those are the typical revenue business lines. Yes, there's the capital arms, there's the insurance arms, etc. But ultimately, those are the business line, the core businesses of any bank, right? So you have to be playing in that space. You can't risk those things. But where you want to experiment, maybe you want to use a partner to do that with, right? Where you want to try something different, or maybe you want to expand internationally, right? If you look at Saudi Arabia, you've already seen Al Rajhi Bank, right? One of the biggest Muslim banks in the world, right? If not the biggest, I think it's about 20 million.
I think it is the biggest.
Active customers, right? 21 million, right? Moving into the Far East, right? Really interesting, right? SMB, right? And Credit Suisse, right? And there were some ups and downs with there, but you see this movement out of the country, right? So how do you get into those geographies? Who do you partner up with, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that here in the UK, where I think for the longest time it's felt like Islamic banking has been a bit stagnant here. But then you had all of these fintechs coming up, people like Wahid Invest or Fider, Nesta, and dare I say Kestrl as well. And now we're seeing a lot of foreign Islamic banks approaching and saying, look, you guys know the market well. We're thinking of entering, but we don't have the right licenses. You guys do. Maybe there's something we could do here. So that's becoming more and more of a common conversation. But just going back to what you said about, okay, gone are the days of the big software vendors. There is still some room for experimentation, but in line with those metrics, right? Really focusing on growth in those core revenue generating areas of the bank. So what do partners look like then? Are they early stage fintechs, people who are really aligned on solving a real problem? Maybe it's for SMEs, maybe it's for an underserved or even underbanked member of the population. And then a bank could come in and maybe it's a capital injection, or maybe it's building something very bespoke and a real differentiator for that bank. Do you see more partnerships happening at the early stage as opposed to the big vendors now?
What we think banks can offer, right? Any early stage company, right, or fintech, is a couple of things. We can offer the governance, the risk, the compliance capabilities, right, which those teams do not have.
For sure.
And this is what they really actually need, right? Banks could even do the software development for them. So this is an interesting outside-in view, not inside. It's not the inside-out view, not the outside-in view, right? So it's really interesting to think about the different models you could apply there, right? And that's where I think the magic could really start to see some scaling of these businesses, right? It's not just, we'll do this for the bank, right?
Sure.
But maybe the bank needs to take some of the responsibility as well, right, to doing something for these fintechs.
Yes.
So it's, again, a real partnership, right? And think about it from that perspective, yeah? And then you can start then innovating, right? And then you don't have this conflict about, this is the traditional revenue line, you're going to eat my revenues, you're going to cannibalize it, right? Because you don't want to get into that battle, right? That is a waste of everybody's energy. I think it's too much of politics, right? Why not really reinvent the model a little bit here, right? And I think this is where I would say the fintechs are going to be at, right? And now that relationship can vary from the early days of, just give me money, right? Or just buy me out, or just like embed me and then I'll go back to my investors. It's really about saying, okay, right, is this the team, right? Who are they? What did they try to do? Have they done things before? Have they failed? What are they trying to achieve?
Sure.
Your point about what is the objective of this thing, right? What is the business problem that they're really trying to solve? It is a real business problem, right? Or is it a solution chasing a problem?
Yes.
Which we've seen quite often, right? So we got to be really thoughtful about this. Right? Because at the end of the day, if a bank takes on a partner, it is responsible for that partner. It is ultimately the liability sits with the bank. So we have to take that with a serious amount of due consideration, thought about how we scale and grow those businesses. Right? Now you can argue, we should do a portfolio set of business, get 14 businesses, one will hit it right. I think the day of cheap money is over, right?
Yeah.
But I think if banks and fintechs can find themselves in that space, right, in that relationship, I think it will be really great, because then the bank can do many things with it, right?
I think so.
The bank can say, okay, I can be an equity holder, I can do a complementary product set, I can do a new product set,
Yeah.
or you know what, maybe I want to do something where you need to go to investors and maybe you need to do a fundraising round. I'll use my capital business to do that for you.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that kind of cross collaboration. We're doing that in Malaysia, we're seeing that in the UAE. We love to do it in Saudi as well. But a lot of these collaborations happen through some sort of innovation team in the bank launching a hackathon or a competition. That's basically what happened in Malaysia. Same in the UAE. There was a hackathon. 100 startups applied, and we all kind of came up with these solutions. But they gave us these core metrics that they were trying to shift. Like, okay, we're trying to do something to seriously improve financial literacy, but at the end of the day, improve saving rates within the bank, get people to be opening up more and more savings accounts, and basically push these products to customers. How is it going to help them? And that's something really heartening to see, especially from Islamic banks, which I think for the longest time have borne this stigma of not really caring about retail market, not really caring about innovation. So it's really heartening to see individuals like you in organizations like Bank AlJazira really pushing the innovation agenda.
You know, it's interesting that you talk about Islamic banking.
Yes.
Right? Because this is a very misunderstood term, right? It's only for Muslims, right? But really, Islamic banking for me is really the heart of what banking should always be. Ethics, transparency, trust, right? Which I don't think many consumers out there will say is really happened in their journeys, right?
100%.
And I think this is what many regulators are trying to drive as well, right? Trying to get that level of transparency, trust, and ethics back into the value chain. Also on the value chain, it's not about making money for money's sake. I've got money, I'm going to give it to you, and in exchange, just for giving you the money, I want to get something back for it, right? I think, especially the youth today, are looking for a much more dynamic, much more symbiotic relationship, right? You want me to be successful? Well, you got to come in with me, right? Give me some skin in the game, right? How do I know you're really on this journey with me? This is easy. This is not hard. This is not easy thing to do, right? And it's quite difficult, right? Because it requires a great amount of trust. It requires a great transparency, right?
Yeah.
Into the relationship, right? And I think that's where this concept of Islamic financing is more really about how do we really value the asset that you're trying to build, generate, right? For the consumer and for the lender. There has to be that shared value. If you don't have that shared value, I think you're going to really struggle. I think some of the banks in the world that have done a good job of this, I look down at South Africa is Discovery Bank, right? Really smart, right? About how they use their vitality program in a loyalty manner, right? Really stitching together, really shared value, right? You demonstrate the right behaviors, you get rewarded. And this is about your physical fitness, your mental fitness, right? Your financial fitness. Really, really smart, clever, slickly put together, right? And I think this is where the world will migrate to, definitely with the new generation. 100%. I look at my kids, right? Definitely. They will not just, they'll question why.
Why should I be using this?
Yeah,
why this brand?
Yeah, why, right?
Yeah. So the things which banks have relied on for the longest time, which have just been like this generational trust in the few big high street names, do you think that's going away with the new generation?
Let me give you an interesting stat. Last year, there were more billionaires and millionaires created through inheritance than through entrepreneurship.
Really?
Yeah, EY, I think the 2024 Global Wealth Report.
Wow.
Check it. I think it's EY. I might be mistaken, but I think it's EY Global Wealth Report, right? First time in the history, right? So that shows you, right, that money's changing hands. The relationships that you previously had with your bank is dynamic. Also, information is freely available now, right?
Yeah.
If you want to find out what's happening in the world, if you want to, you can use ChatGPT. I wouldn't put your financial information into it.
No,
but if you want to look at growth rates, you can look at if you use the US Fed data, right? You can see almost country by country, right? With sectors which are growing, which industries are growing, right? Growth rate projections. I mean, these are forecasts, right? So this is not financial advice at this moment in time. But my point is there, right? You're armed with a lot more information, right? That you don't, this opaqueness right, is gone.
Yeah.
I'm not just coming to you because I need money, right? I want you to help me be successful. And I think this is the real mantra that is out there, right? We also want to create a society that is more together, a planet that is moving in the right direction and doing more for the world, right? This is what you got to look at, right? It's one planet. I always love the Earth horizon picture, right? Because it's like this marble, right? And it's one. It's not about that piece of land or this piece of land, right? It's the only planet we have, right? So we all got to get along, right, to move along.
Thanks for listening to Muslim Money Talk. If you like what you've heard so far, you might be interested in what we're doing over at Kestrl. Kestrl is a software service that helps banks and wealth managers to better serve their Muslim customers. Maybe it's launching your own digital app, providing it with personalized features for your customers, from budgeting and auto saving, product recommendation, to faith-based features like auto zakat calculation or Sharia stock and fund screening. We have it all here at Kestrl. So join us on our mission of helping Muslims to grow their wealth without having to compromise. Yeah, I mean, I wish more people thought like that. But I think, you know, we've talked about a lot in terms of the bank's views and people's views culturally. What does Bank AlJazira want to focus on over the next 5, 10? Because you say you want to be here for the next 500 years.
Yeah.
What are the real core metrics? Is it looking at the underbanked? A lot of them are women. Is it the underserved? What do you think?
I think, you know, when I got to the bank, right, one of the key things we asked ourselves is, why does the bank exist? And we asked a lot of people, right, internal staff, external the consumers, customers, non-customers, right, the famous Clayton Christians. Go ask your non-customers why they're not customers of your bank. And one thing we realized is, being an Islamic bank is not a cult. It's no more a differentiation factor. Every bank,
Absolutely.
Every bank now has an Islamic banking division because of this need that's out there. Secondly, people want to be associated with something that has a positive impact on the planet, society, on the community that you're living in. So we said, we need a purpose, right? Forget about the classic mission, objectives, strategic. Those are all wishy-washy statements. Ultimately, you need something that you can be able to inspire and deliver on, right? It must be a stretch target. So the first thing we said was, we need to focus on enriching lives through financial well-being. We know, right, through our research, those people that have financial wealth, right, and financial health, more importantly, tend to live longer. They have great careers. They tend to have an outsized impact on the community that they live in, either through their charity work, right, their community and social responsibility, but they also start businesses, which then creates employment, which then drives economic activity, drives inclusion, accessibility. Great things happen. So this is where we hang our hat on, right? So I think if we can deliver on this purpose, it's really good. Now, underpinning this purpose, right, is a whole set of like the classic where to play, how to win, right? So do you want to play in certain segments, right? Do you want to play in all segments? Who's playing in that segment? What is their value proposition there, right? If you're going to play there, are you going to offer the same thing? Or are you going to try to disrupt it? So the bank has really think through about these niches that it wants to play in. And I think this is really key. The bank is not a mass bank, right? It's a boutique bank with strong upside potential. And it's got like 3 key priorities. If you talk to anybody in the bank, they'll tell you about the enriching lives through financial well-being. They'll talk to you about the strategy wheel, the 3x3. And they'll talk about the 3 core objectives. Financial health of the bank, right? Of itself. So you can't be promoting financial health out there if your own financial metrics are not in the right.
Sure.
ROE, ROA, cost of income, cost of funds, right? Like classic metrics that shareholders, stakeholders look at.
For sure.
Right? And if your employees can understand this and understand the importance of it, brilliant. I mean, a long time ago, I did a study, right? A global study. And in every country, the industry that was most indebted, right, from an employee perspective, was people working in financial services, right, that needed the most help. So that was a big thing, right, number 1. Number 2, we said, focus on the organizational health. So financial health, organizational health, culture, values, behaviors.
Okay.
Right? And then the third one, I think, was around the customer, right, around the brand experience, the customer experience, right? Now, there's some challenges of NPS. Do you use NPS? Do you use some other metric? But the importance is right? Really putting that customer at the center of how you deal with things, right? Do they really have to wait and click through 9 elements on a IVR, right? Those days are gone, right? Or going through a 10-stage process, right? Or waiting 20 minutes, right, to get help, right, to speaking to an individual. I think those are days all gone. So when you look at the bank, these are the 3 key things that we want to do. Now, how we do that, right? There's many techniques, right? There's obviously a digital transformation agenda, which we always laugh at because sometimes we get challenged, right? And say, like, when will your digital transformation end? And the reality is it will never end, right? We're dealing with artificial intelligence or general purpose, general artificial intelligence right now, right? You still have to build up your own LLM models, right? Because you want to insulate it. You want to make sure that you're putting the right data sets in, making sure it gets trained on the right data. But then there's quantum computing coming in, right? Which is enabler, right? Which is definitely the next big thing. But you cannot go out and say, oh, we're going to do AI. Firstly, you're going to terrify your staff. Secondly, you're going to excite your investors, right? Because nobody really has a good handle on it. But then the big, as a leadership team, question we've got to ask ourselves, how are we using this to solve a real problem?
Yeah. Otherwise, it goes back to the classic solution in search of a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, we're just throwing money. We're all with the hype. We got big data programs, right? But really, what are you doing, right? We keep on hearing about hyper-personalization, right? And customization. Very difficult to see that in any organization these days, right? Are you using it to do interviews, right? I've seen some great, because everybody's also using these tools and bots to help you coach for the interviews, right? So you got to be a bit more creative in how you ask your questions and testing skills and knowledge, and teamwork.
Yeah, and we talked about this before offline, but I've got a friend who's through his business, they've just launched a podcast entirely AI, right? So they just say, this is what I want them to talk about. There's going to be one man, there's going to be one woman. The guy's going to have an American accent, British accent. Go 45 minutes. I couldn't tell. I really, really couldn't tell. Like it's shocking what could be done. But again, it's about all of those options out there and distilling them down to what's the actual metric that you're trying to push, I guess, at the bank.
And then you try to take that now into actionable plans, right? And tracking these plans. Now this is where the fun comes in, right? Because nobody really wants to be tracked, right? Nobody really wants to be held accountable. But this is when the culture kicks in, right?
Yeah.
So this is why I always say, have very clear goals in mind, but start off with your culture before you start off with the technology. Set the groundwork correctly. There's a great case study. I think, I'm not sure if it's a Harvard Business Review case study. It's Commercially Bank. If you haven't had a chance, and I would recommend this to all your audience, go look at Commercially Bank, right? One of the Balkan countries, ex-socialist state, right, coming out, right, trying to transform the organization. And contrary to the popular mantra at the time, they didn't say, oh, this is the technology, right, we got to go for it, right, let's build a digital bank, right? They really started to look at, okay, what are the fundamental metrics in the banking sector that they wanted to meet? They then said, how are we going to train our people to use the technology? Because if they didn't train the people, right, you could bring the best, doomed to fail.
Yeah.
You have to prepare the soil. You have to prepare the ground, right, before you bring all of these cool things in. So the first 2 years was slower. But if you look at that bank now, it's like, wow, incredible job.
Wow, yeah. It just goes back to, that's, I guess, why, because I remember when you was explaining your role to me, transformation wasn't just about tech, it was the people as well and the culture. I was like, okay, that's a lot to throw in there. But it's hugely important if you want to have actual lasting change.
It is, right? And you think about, as an executive, right? You got to be in the detail, right? But you also got to zoom yourself out, right?
Yeah.
And see what's happening in the entire organization. That's why the role of CEO is so difficult in many organizations. Many people think, the CEO sits there, he's got his lieutenants, right? But it's difficult. You're managing customers, you're managing the regulator, you're managing your shareholders, managing the board. But you also need to have this 360-degree view of everything. Now, most individuals know how tough it is, right? Having the 360-degree view in your own personal life.
Yeah.
Your parents, your wife's parents, yourself, your wife, your kids, right? Your partner, school, right? Your personal ambitions. Now think about that and put some steroids on it and then drop yourself into a bank.
Yeah.
That's the difficulty of getting this 360-degree view so that you don't have these conflicts that are happening, right? You have clarity of role. What am I in charge of, right? This is how you devolve the politics out of it, right? Very clear, right, roles and responsibilities. Very clear, like, this is how we collaborate. These are the rules of engagement in a collaboration. So people know the freedom in a frame, right? Otherwise, you get the innovation team doing something and the business team doesn't take it up.
Yeah.
Or the business team doing something and the innovation team, what is that, right? That is like not innovation, that's like incremental on your current product set. So these are the challenges that we have to solve constantly, right? And unblock. Because we're a mid-sized bank, right? 3,000 employees, right? Plus minus. That's not a lot of employees, but it's also not little employees, right? So how do you get to everybody? Does the guy that's working or cleaning the branch at night, right, understand the goal and the purpose of this organization, right? He doesn't have to know each of the metrics that we want to do this to our cost-to-income ratio, but does he know about financial health, organizational health, customer, right? Because if he leaves with that, that's good enough.
It goes back to like, I think what JFK said or something, like when I think he talked to a janitor at I'm going to completely butcher this, but I think there was a janitor at NASA and they asked him, well, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? And he said, we're trying to put people on the moon, right? Which is every single person throughout the organization really knowing what the mission is at the company. That's the old thing they teach at business school. One of the few things I remember.
But it's one of the few things you remember, right?
Yeah.
Now, I know if I ask each of the different domain areas, right, whether it's the technology team, if I ask them about their tech strategy, I can ask the internal audit team for their strategy, right, or the cybersecurity team for their strategy/plan, right? I mean, you're going from corporate strategy down to business strategy, enablement strategies, right? Plans, tactical objectives, right? Functional objectives, right? KPIs, OKRs. You can throw all the acronym soup at this, right? But ultimately, if everybody is pulling in the same general direction, you'll get there, right? Because you also need to have that freedom a little bit. And ultimately, if the organization does well, everybody does well.
If there is one takeaway that you could give to a CEO or a chief strategy officer, a chief technical officer, whoever it is who's listening, to actually drive change in an organization and get buy-in from stakeholders, what's the one piece of advice you would give?
Ask for help. It's scary, right? How many senior executives do not ask for help? And I'm not talking about asking for help to other consultants.
Yeah.
Speak to other banks. Speak to your customers. Speak to your fellow peers. Right? Sometimes there's competitive laws, right? So anti-competition. So you're not sharing product details, customer details, right? But you can always talk to banks outside the country as well. That's a great source, right? Because people don't have that avenue to exchange ideas, right? I think there's this global community, right, of bankers out there. They're all struggling with the same challenges, right? Different markets, different conditions, right? But the challenges are still consistent, right? Which is about how do you, I think this is the nut of it, right? When the rate of change is higher outside the organization than inside the organization, how do you meet those ever-changing needs? How do you scale up your own cadence, right? Your ability to sense and respond, right? And take advantage of these gaps. So for me, when I look at CEOs, I look at, you've got to trust your teams. You've got to build that relationship. You've got to build that ecosystem, right? To really understand how you could be helped by other players. You're never going to have all the answers. Not everybody is an expert in everything. Impossible, right? I love, my favorite topic now is like lots of AI experts out there, right? But this is my big thing, right? And I always say this, right? I'm South African, right? But there's a great African proverb. And I always think, keep this top of mind. And when I'm doing like my big presentations or when I land a message, I always say this. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Wow. And what do you think stops people asking for help? Is it pride? Is it fear of the competition or giving away your thoughts?
I think you get so caught up in the day-to-day, right? You forget about it.
Yeah.
Right? It just like slips your mind, right? But you're quite happy in your personal life to ask your mates for advice. My toilet is clogged. Yeah, I mean, like,
but I get it. Yeah.
Which school should I go to,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
I think this is super untapped. Oh, trust your teams, right?
Yeah. In the startup world, it's kind of a necessity. We have to do it. There's no other choice. You have to. I think in the UK especially, there's so many great fintech groups, and we've gone through accelerators like Techstars, where we were every single day like working with entrepreneurs from across loads of communities, from fashion tech, health tech, all of that. But the amount of learnings that we got in there really helped accelerate us. Really, really did, in a way that I kind of miss. So that
You see, you kind of miss, right? Meaning
Yeah.
that
Somewhere along the range.
somewhere
Yeah.
along the line, right? You lost it.
Yeah.
You can find it again, right? But it's because you got investors, shareholders,
Yeah.
regulators, business plans, right? Lots happening in personal life, right? So you tend to forget about this. Like, hey, sometimes I just need to go back a bit, right?
For sure.
To my roots
For sure.
and connect with everybody.
Wow. So listen, man, it's been a pleasure going through the career aspects, the talking about how fast things are moving in Saudi. But let's bring it down to Nahim as a person. So you started life in South Africa.
Yeah.
Right? You grew up there, you're a proud South African. What made you up sticks and move on this incredible journey and this adventure that you're having in Saudi right now? Was that an easy change to make? You had, I think early on in this podcast, you said, you self-identify as a husband and father.
Yeah.
So, convincing your family to make that move, was that easy? How did you sell that?
It's a good point about selling things, right? I have to go back a little bit, right? There's a bit of backstory to this.
Yeah.
And it started with my parents. I told you about the purpose of the organization, and I always tell people, when you join an organization, a company, a team, whatever, right? Make sure your values are aligned. Because the values are not aligned and you're just doing it for the money, it's not going to end well. And I know everybody has bread and butter issues, but I always say this: money will come, money will also go. When my parents, I grew up in apartheid South Africa, right? A generation ago, right? Apartheid was really one of the most blighted things on this planet, right? Racial segregation, economic segregation was really, really difficult. Started probably during the colonization era, right? And then rolled through the 1900s in South Africa. But my parents grew up in that environment. My mum, right, she was quite a bright student, right? We're talking about 67, lots of upheaval, a lot of sanctions in South Africa, right? Separate development. But my mum was very smart, right? So she had ambitions of going professional, doing other things. But in a matric year, right, which is your final grade before you go into university, right? My grandfather lost his job. And he lost his job. He was highly educated, right? But he was working in a plastics factory manufacturing factory. He lost his job, right? And he lost it due to automation.
Oh, really?
So when people talk to me about artificial intelligence or robotics or digitalization, right? I think, about the social consequences, right? I think about how we're training our employees, right, to adapt to this world, right? How we're prepping the ground for these technologies that are coming. How would we make them more resilient, right? How would we give them the skills that they'll be successful in whatever they do? That time, there was no social securities net. There's no retrenchment funds. There was no pension funds. There was no job protection, nothing. So my grandfather lost his job. He lost his job. He became a paper delivery boy, right, as they called it in that area. Obviously, my grandmother was at that time, that era globally, right? Females were not working. It was very humbling for a really educated person. But the downstream impact of that was my mom got 2 scholarships, right? One to study medicine, one to study at the French at the Sorbonne. But she couldn't take up those opportunities because there was no money. There's no social savings security, no investments, nothing to protect you, right? Government was not interested in you. So she went into teaching because teaching is something she could do and earn money at the same time. And she had a great career, right, as a teacher. Taught thousands of students. They still come up to her, when down in South Africa, they'll come, Mrs. Bassa, thank you so much. But I think of the lost opportunity.
Yeah.
Then I think about the rest of the people that were in that situation. Then I think about how that situation still permeates now globally, right, in many different regions of the world. And that's why I think financial service has the capacity, it has the capability to really transform people's lives. So that's how I got into financial services, right?
Wow.
Really, if you think about it, that was my whole thing, how can I really enable this, right? And I mentioned earlier, in Saudi Arabia, people think people have money, right? Even if you do have money, you're still underserved, right? And I think this goes for many people around the world. Now, my mom had a great career. Brother and I studied hard, right? Went to school, university, got a job, etc. But then a couple of years ago during COVID, my father passed away.
Sorry,
Right.
Roger.
Really, really difficult time, right? And I think this went for a lot of people. As if that was not traumatic enough. Estate planning, right, was so difficult, right?
Did you not have a will?
No, you had a will and everything, right?
Okay.
But the process around it, right, is like almost archaic,
Yeah.
right? And I think this is definitely a global thing, right? That's the first thing. But you get over it, right? Because you don't deal with this every day, right? So when it hits you, you kind of like, you got the emotional loss, right? And you're still grieving, right? And you grieve for many years. But then you start thinking, now, because my mom and dad came from the generation where there's no social savings and security net, right? They made sure, right, that they saved, that they would have some sort of retirement pot, etc., blah, 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 funeral cover, etc. So my mom came into some money, but she doesn't know what to do with the money. Does she just stick it into a normal savings account that gives you what, 1%, 2%, 3%, right? So the money is devaluing itself, right? Inflation is going up. Exchange rates are volatile. And I'm sure everybody will appreciate this. No matter what you do, if you are a child, you will always be seen as the child by your parents. So financial advice will not come. But I realized how difficult it was for my mom, right?
Yeah.
To really like think about how does she deal with this amount, right? What does she do with it, right? I mean, I listened to the financial advisors, right? Our financial advisor, unfortunately, also passed away at the same time, right?
God.
So, and he was a bit younger than my dad, right? So it was really tough, right?
Yeah.
So who do you trust, right? What is the financial advice that you're getting? And sticking it into a savings deposit or a fixed term deposit, right? A time deposit. This is not going to create anything, right? Taking out an RA at that age is not logical as well. But this is the advice she was getting. And I think there's a lot of people that are doing it. And most of these people are female. Generally, females outlive their the husbands, right?
Yeah.
So then you start thinking, okay, have we really solved this problem at all, right? Not just of accessibility and inclusion, but of growing your wealth and protecting your wealth and doing some estate planning, right? Inheritance next, leaving a legacy, right? This is so untapped. Right? And this is where the real needs are, right? Now, I'll throw a question to you. Name me one fintech that is solving this problem.
The estate planning issue.
The problem that I've just described to you.
I'd like to think we're making baby steps towards it at Kestrl. The problem that we identified here is that exactly what you've described is exacerbated amongst the Muslim population, because we're seeing a lot of people whose parents came here as immigrants and they really worked hard. They set up shop fronts and restaurants, and maybe they were taxi drivers, and their children studied hard and went to good schools, and especially those in London, and they found themselves in financial services, suddenly making more money than previous generations had seen. And the issue is that they have no generational knowledge as to what they should be doing with that money. And then when you throw in the other factor of, is the Sharia compliant or not, right? Suddenly you've got a bunch of people who are not putting money in savings accounts because it's not halal. They look at Islamic banks and they don't trust them because of poor customer service, user experiences, higher fees. So this is putting money in current accounts. So the idea of it being eroded by inflation is exacerbated because there's nothing offsetting it even a little bit. And then you have investing, and there's two sides of this. You've got, and it tends to be young men who are not risk averse in the slightest, and they'll be going to all kinds of alternative products. Okay, let me go in on crypto. Or
all the high risk, low learning.
Yes, exactly. Maybe they watch a YouTube video or a few TikToks and all this kind of thing, and they'll go into it. Maybe they make some money more often than not, they lose it. And then on the other side, you've got women who are making good money and they're supporting their families, but they see investing as almost a step too far. They want like serious financial literacy, which they haven't got for whatever reason. Maybe their parents didn't know. Maybe their parents would never talk to them about it because they were a woman. So the financial literacy problem is huge in the Muslim space here in the UK and throughout the Western world. When you throw on top the poor services targeting Muslims especially, that's really what we're trying to solve at Kestrl. So that was where this idea came in, where we saw, okay, people are wedded to their current accounts. Right, really hard to get them to move their money out of HSBC or even Monzo or Starling, right? So we thought, okay, let's forget that. We're not trying to make you sign up to a Kestrl card. Let's connect those accounts in through open banking into almost like this halal financial assistant for you. That's what the app is. It sits alongside your existing bank accounts. Plug in those accounts and we'll pull in the data and we'll create a personal plan for you. Auto budgeting. Let's make sure you have the basics right. You have more money coming in than you have going out, because a lot of people struggled with that. And then let's pull money towards goals. Tell us what your goals are and we'll save towards that car, that house, or Hajj, right? So it's something which you really, really is important to you. And then suddenly you've introduced this long-term view of thinking when it comes to finances, something that Morgan Housel talks about in Psychology of Money, or Benjamin Graham, or Warren Buffett, all these concepts which, when you come from a family that's used to living paycheck to paycheck or is seriously indebted, and there's a crazy stats put out there, I think by Muslim Census, where 56% of Muslims in this country are in that position or struggle to pay at least one of their bills, or thinking of taking out debt or are already in debt. Suddenly we're introducing this idea of a future and long-term thinking. And then with that comes the idea of save for the short-term goals, investing for long-term goals. And now it's the final part here, and this is where partnerships come in play, where Kestrl's doing all that part and the financial literacy and the basics. Let's bring in those banks who had the products, but they lack the digital services for whatever reason. Let's put their products on there, and then let's just get this flywheel going, where we have this youth. Muslims tend to be a very young generation, right? Especially, it's the same is true here in the UK. They have the money.
Is also, if I can interrupt you, also reflective of Africa, South America,
for sure,
Middle East, Far East, right?
Most of the world,
right?
Yeah, for sure. So let's do that. We'll be the customer service, the front ends, the financial literacy, but we still rely on those banks which have still a certain amount of trust and the actual capital, the firepower to put behind it. And let's work together to crack this problem. So that's where we are with Kestrl and how we're kind of trying to tackle this problem. And we're seeing other fintechs as well. There's a great fintech, we'll have her on the podcast soon, Nina Mahanti, who runs Blue Money, who's introducing the idea of saving circles, right? Which is
fantastic. The Stockfells.
So it's like, in Pakistan they call it committees. I can't remember what they call it in Malaysia, but Malaysian
those are super successful, right? But that's because they have that trust, they have the transparency.
That's the thing. So how do we digitize that, right? It's the idea you've got 10 people, if they live in a community, they're all putting money into this pot, and whenever someone needs it, it comes out of the pot. But then how do you, if the problem there digitally is, how do you introduce trust amongst strangers, amongst people you've never met before? So there's people there tackling it. There's Takadao, which is a great blockchain fintech in Saudi, which is also trying to do it, but using blockchain and the crypto, which is like a whole different space. So I'm bullish on fintechs, partly because I'm biased, because I made it, but I'm most bullish on fintechs collaborating with big banks such as yourselves, who I think, where we're both super mission driven, we can really work to make a difference in this space.
And this is where the values, right, come in, right? The purpose, the problems that you're trying to solve. So with these fintechs, right, I think they can also have access, right, to these untapped markets, because it's actually easier for them, right, to recruit these potential customers than traditional banks. Because traditional banks, yes, might have the brand, right, might have the physical infrastructure, so there's a bit of trust there, right? But they still also have some of the legacy.
Yes, and the legacy issues as well that come with.
I always say, I spend a lot of my time looking at how these puzzle pieces fit together in a bank, right? And our role in the broader community and society. But it's also sometimes a lot of unwinding the spaghettiness. A lot of corporate spaghettiness that is built up and hardened, right, over many, many years. It's like your arteries, right, calcifies, right, stops the blood flow, right? It almost like chokes you.
Yeah. It almost makes you want to just, I don't know, clear the board and start again.
But it's not easy, right?
You can't do that in a big corporate.
You can't do that, right? You can't do that in big. This is why you have to prep the people for the changes that are coming, right? So when you start off this question about like, how did I get to Saudi, right? So this was my journey, right? Really purpose-driven, really trying to make a positive impact, right? Thinking about my parents' situation and the challenges they fought, right? What I believe is true for many other people out there, right? In many different communities. And I know if I can just solve like one part of it, right? Yeah. Maybe it's a partnership with Kestrl, right? I made a positive impact, right, on somebody's life.
Sure.
I've changed that person's kid, that person can live their best life, right? Because they've gone and chased their dreams. It's not dreams deferred.
And that's the impact you want to make in this world. That's your personal mission and how it aligns with your corporate mission.
Right. When the opportunity in Saudi came along, right, it was great because the organization had the same mindset and belief, right? And this is what I'm saying. Search out organizations that do this. Big, small, medium-sized, right? You and them will find a happy medium, right, in whatever role. And you'll be super successful, guaranteed.
It sounds like, and thank you so much for sharing that story. It sounds like your mum was a huge influence on you and your brother's lives growing up. Because you've always struck me as the real definition of a lifelong learner. Because I think like every week on LinkedIn, without fail, you're always posting about the book that you read this week, which is fantastic, right? I've taken so many. I've followed your advice basically on what I should be reading next. It's great. So everyone should follow Nahim on LinkedIn for those insights, as well as plenty of other stuff. And of course, look, you've done from your undergrad, you did your master's, MBA. I think you're doing a PhD now.
Doctorate program, right, at Thunderbird School.
Yeah, and that's in banking and financial services.
Yeah, it is in that, right? Yeah. But I'm really thinking about how artificial intelligence, ESG, sustainability, and open banking all play together, right, into a framework that organizations, especially financial services organizations, can really use, right? Like, here's a playbook, right? How you can actually bring it together to create real value, right? To create real inclusion. But I'd love to do it through a case study, right? From the Middle East, right? I have a company I'm trying to work with there called Tarabat, right? Which is MENA's largest open banking entity, right? And because there's so few case studies out of these other geographies, right? Which are so important to the learnings. You get a lot of consultants, and I'm not having a dig at consultants. Right? They'll talk about Nubank, but nobody's really worked at Nubank. Nobody's really talked to the people at Nubank, right? Or Keiko Bank in South Korea, right? Which is another great transformation story of the country, right? How do you bring this together, right? Into a practical framework, right? Not just stuff on a PowerPoint slide, right? That people can organizations really can use, right? To create competitive and sustainable advantage in a very dynamic, changing world. How I manage, it's incredible, right? I think you just got to be a bit disciplined and have consistency, right? I mean, I told you, I'm a loving father, right? Proud husband, right? Two young munchkins, Amir and Yahya, they're 9 and 10, so they're small, right? So, going in the world, right, experience different cultures, right, is very important for me, right, to teach them. As South African, we have one of the most diverse societies in the world, right? Also one of the highest inequality rates in the world. Right, so we should be grateful for what we have and know that there's a greater responsibility on us to make a positive impact, right? And that could be in many ways, right? That could be paying your taxes, that could be building schools, building water wells, many, many things, right? Whatever is it that you want to do, right? Nobody's here to judge you, right? If you want to just give money, give money. If you can give time, even better.
Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, but I'm basically a new dad, another one on the way. Got married during this whole crazy process of Kestrl and during COVID. It sounds like, mashallah, you're someone who is doing a great job balancing the corporate life with that family life. From South Africa, taking them to Saudi. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, I think the first big tip, right? Marry well, right? Okay. If I could do one thing again, right? I probably would like to have met my wife earlier and married her earlier, right?
Did you guys meet through work or?
Long story. I don't know whether she'd want me to tell this on a public forum, right?
Totally up to you.
I don't want to remain happily married, right? But you have to have, just like how you're going for an organization that has a common value, right? Common values. If you need to meet somebody who has that common values and outlook on life. MashaAllah, my wife was experienced. She worked at Unilever. She worked at Investec, right? She has a great career on herself, right? Way before she met me, right? We had 2 kids, right? We realized that we want to make a positive impact on this world. We want to give them great experiences at the same time. We could do it in South Africa. I mean, I was very fortunate in my earlier days in my career, traveled across Africa, worked as crazy places like Liberia. If you want to see geopolitics at play, right, you'll see the Chinese Belt and Road and Belt Initiative at play. You'd see the American economic might at play there as well, right? Especially from a security perspective. You'd also see a lot of Arabian influence, right? So you'll see a lot of Lebanese working in Liberia, right? So you see all of these dynamics at play in the locals, right? Really fascinating. This was about a decade ago, right? So that gives you good experiences, right? And good cultural understanding of how people work and how when you sit across from somebody, right? You might have different languages, you might have different cultural norms, right? But if you have a common understanding of where you want to go, you can be really successful. We also both worked in Australia for a little bit of time, right? So it was really good for us to think about, okay, what next, right? What should we do next, right? Especially considering our kids and where we want to go with them. But there are sacrifices you have to make. And the one thing I always tell people is that have this consistency. I do read a lot, right? My superpower is reading. Right? I can read very quickly, right? From a young age, I can read, digest information very, very quickly. Probably got that from my mom, right? Probably got my social skills from my dad, right? But you also have to understand there are going to be hard lines that you have to set, right? If you want to work 14, 18 hours a day, you can work 14, but that'll come as a cost, right? There's some sacrifices that you'll make on your family life. Are you okay to make those sacrifices? And don't fool yourself with the thing, I'm doing this for my family, because you're kind of doing it for yourself, right? So understand that this is a clear choice if you are doing this, right? As an executive, I think you got to be able to package and make sure that you time box things, right? It's like you got a glass of water, it's not the glass half full or the half empty, but like you have a quarter for yourself, a quarter for work, a quarter for your family, and a quarter for everything else. As soon as you start dipping into the other areas, right, because you're going past that quarter, you're sacrificing something from there. Now that might be your physical health, right? Might be your relationships. Be very clear that you understand these trade-offs, because then they get calcify.
Yeah.
Right. So I always like to have time with my family, right? I always like to engage my mind, right? The one thing I am failing at, I can tell you right now, because if there was a metric, I'm definitely failing at it. I've always wanted to do a triathlon, like a proper triathlon.
Really?
Right? Yeah, always, right? Yeah, failing. Failing hopelessly on that one.
Weren't you training for it earlier in the year? Or?
Yeah, I am training, right? But it's not really there. It's not as consistent, as disciplined as everything else that is happening, right? But it's interesting. I look at other people, right? Other colleagues, right? Some of them are amazing, right? They have, mashallah, they have different things on the go, right? But it's about having that consistency, discipline. I think it's important for myself. I'm a lifelong learner because I want to set an example to my children as well. It's not just them doing schoolwork after school, right? It's not just me doing stuff on the weekend, right? It's about them saying, it's learning knowledge and application of that knowledge.
From a really young age, seeing you doing all of that, traveling the world. It's like you said, making your kids into global citizens, literally. And that's the viewpoint that you're able to give them.
And they will have their own lives, right? At some point. I always tell my wife this. At 13, 14, they'll have their own friends. They already know about the payments ecosystem in the world, judging by the behavior on Roblox, right? And how much of credits they require, right? How many chores that they have to do to earn those credits. So I always say, don't live your life through your children. Let them be children. Let them go and set the right example, because they're going to mirror you. 100% they're going to mirror you. Right? If they see you set the example, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that example is what they're going to carry on throughout their life.
Whether they like it or not, I think I spent the longest time trying to convince myself that I wasn't like my father. and then realizing that, okay, if I was even, doing half of what he's done, or a quarter of it, then I think, alhamdulillah, I would have lived a good life. So I think it's that kind of coming to terms with that, Maybe that's just me. Maybe
it's a very valid point. Wife and I always, before we had our kids, right, always said, when we have kids, right, make sure that they have the best parts of us, right, and avoid the worst parts, right? Yeah, that's another one that we have to question, because you see things and you're like, wow, I know exactly where they get that from.
I know what you mean. I mean, mine's only 2 years old, but I definitely see it. It's like, okay, yeah, I know where he's got that. Nahim, we're pretty much out of time. But this was incredible. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to have you on again. Maybe when we're in Saudi, we can bring you on. And
I think that'll be fantastic.
Do a whole different Saudi roadshow.
Love to do it, right? I mean, there's so many things we can talk about, right? Yeah. I think people really like to understand a lot more. I mean, we only talked a little bit about the real transformation in the kingdom, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is it like living there, right? What are the people like, right? What are the cultural norms? What are the do's, the don'ts, right? It's an amazing place, right? And I would always encourage people, like, if you have an opportunity to work in South Africa or Saudi Arabia, grab it, right? These are great learning experience. You can make a real impact, right? It'll be great for yourself as well. But you have places where there's real energy, drive. There's an edge, as I like to call it.
Especially when you're young, when you're not tied down by familial commitments or mortgages or things like that, but just going out there. Is that your main advice?
No, I would say that do it at any age.
Okay.
Do it at any age, right?
Okay.
Because ultimately, right? People always ask me, like, what is this legacy that you talk about, right? And leaving a purpose. You told us a story about where you came from, what you've done, what you've achieved, where you're heading. But like, what do you really want to do? Well, it's simple, very simple for me, right? Create a world where my parents will be proud to grow old in, right? My mom and my in-laws now, right? And my kids curious to grow up in. So I want to grow old up with this, like, proud, like my son is doing something, right? That's positive, right? It doesn't matter about the money. I always tell people, money will come, money will go. It's what you do with your time and that money, right, is important, right? What is that impact that you are doing? Have you touched somebody's life? It's just one person's life, right? And for the kids, grow up with this curiosity, right? Because I can't tell them what skills to learn right now. You read all the textbooks, problem solving, right? Social skills, great, right? But if I can teach them to be curious, ask questions, right, and get a deeper understanding, I think then I've done a good job. This is the goal.
Fantastic. Nahim Bassa, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Areeb. Pleasure with you.
Thank you for listening to the Muslim Money Talk podcast. If you like what you heard, then please subscribe to Muslim Money Talk wherever you might have been listening to this. Give us a like and share it with someone who you think might be interested. It really, really helps us out. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, and see you next time.